Today we will see about the final topic, that is the angiosperms in plant kingdom. So what and all we saw under plant kingdom, we saw so what are the characteristic features of plants, that is they are multicellular, eukaryotic and autotrophic, that is they are able to prepare their own food. So under the plant kingdom we saw about the algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes and gymnosperms. So we saw what are the differences, in what ways they differ from each other, why are they classified under the different categories. So today we'll see in detail about the angiosperms and how these angiosperms differ from algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes and gymnosperms. So these angiosperms, so what are angiosperms? So they are the flowering plants. So when you look around, there are lots of plants. We have seen the various plants with the flowers, fruits. So everything that comes under the category of angiosperms. So the main characteristic feature of angiosperms is the presence of flowers. So what are the uses of flowers? I hope you are familiar with these things. So daily we are seeing flowers. So what are the uses of those flowers in a plant? The main thing is they attract the insects and also birds. So they aid in pollination. That is one of the main factor involved. When compared to that of gymnosperms, they have only seeds, no fruits or flowers. So here this angiosperms are also called the flowering plants. So that is the main difference here. So the angiosperms are also called flowering plants. They are exceptionally large group of plants. So the majority of the plants that exists, that comes under the category of angiosperms. So we saw the gymnosperms and angiosperms that comes under the seed plants. They are also called phanerogams or the spermatophytes, that is they produce seeds. They range in size from tiny, almost microscopic wolfia to tall trees of eucalyptus. So this angiosperms, they vary from very small to tall trees because of the presence of vascular tissues. So they have the well-developed vascular tissues. So when compared from the algae are non-thalloid structure, that is the body is not at all differentiated into any part like root, stem or leaves. But when you see the bryophytes, there are false root, stem and leaves. And from pteridophytes, that is pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, they have the true root, stem and leaves. And we take the vascular tissues. Here the vascular tissues are well developed. Vascular tissues like xylem and phloem are well developed here in the angiosperms. So they are able to grow tall. We saw that in the case of bryophytes and all, because of the absence of vascular tissues, they cannot grow tall, but there the conduction is with the help of parenchymatous tissues. So here xylem and phloem are well developed and help in the conduction of water and other nutrients. And here the angiosperms are divided into two classes based on the number of cotyledons that are present as dicotyledons and monocotyledons. So we'll see in detail about how they differ from gymnosperms, because we saw that even in gymnosperms there are the production of seeds. So here also the seeds are produced, and also vascular tissues are developed in gymnosperms, and here also it shows the presence of vascular tissues. So in what ways they differ from gymnosperms and other plants? So what are the special features of angiosperms? So we'll see in detail. So the first main difference is the presence of flowers. Here, so they're called the flowering plants. And second one is presence of, that is there the cones are present. Cones are present in gymnosperms. So the presence of flowers instead of cones. There we saw that the male cones and female cones will be present. So here the presence of flowers, that is one of the main feature. And then second is the fruit is formed. Fruit is formed which surrounds the seeds. Fruit surrounds the seeds. So there we saw the seeds are naked. There is no covering. So fruit is formed which surrounds the seeds. Then endosperm is formed. There is a formation of endosperm here. Endosperm is formed. But here after fertilization, this is one of the main difference. First, we'll see the process of fertilization, how it is happening in angiosperms, so that it will be clear what is the difference between the endosperm that is formed in angiosperms and the endosperm in gymnosperms. So here the endosperm is formed after fertilization, but in the case of gymnosperms, the endosperm is formed before fertilization. That is one of the difference. And then the next is the formation of the nucleated embryo sac. Formation of nucleated embryo sac. Then another main difference is indirect pollination in the case of angiosperms. So that is by siphonogamy. So what do you mean by siphonogamous fertilization? So yesterday we saw in the case of gymnosperms, there are two types of fertilization. One is zooidogamous and another one is siphonogamous. That is in the case of lower gymnosperms, the zooidogamous fertilization will occur. And in the case of higher gymnosperms, siphonogamous. So siphonogamous means here there will be a formation of pollen tube. And also the male gametes are non-motile. Male gametes are non-motile here. So that is the characteristic feature in siphonogamous. So here how the fertilization is taking place. The pollen grains will stick to the stigma and as a result there will be a formation of pollen tube and thereby fertilization occurs. So that is called the indirect pollination. But in the case of gymnosperm, what will happen? This pollen grains will be directly transferred to the ovule. Direct transfer in the case of gymnosperms. So this is one of the main difference. We saw that in yesterday, that is in gymnosperms, the pollen grains actually they are carried by the wind. Air is the main mode of transport. They are carried by the wind and they are directly transferred to the micropyle end of the ovule in the case of gymnosperms. But here in the case of angiosperms, it sticks to the stigma. And there occurs a formation of pollen tube, and then there occurs a fertilization to form the zygote. So these are the main differences between the gymnosperms and angiosperms. There is the presence of flowers, but in the case of gymnosperms, cones will be present. Here the fruit is formed, which surrounds the seed, but there only naked seeds. And endosperm is formed here after fertilization, but in the case of gymnosperms, the endosperm is formed before fertilization. And here there is a formation of multinucleated embryo sac. And here the pollination is indirect by siphonogamous fertilization. It involves the formation of pollen tube, and here the male gametes are non-motile. So hope it is clear, right? So when you see the angiosperms, we saw that there are two types. One is a monocotyledon and another one is a dicotyledon. So on the basis of the number of cotyledons, we are classifying it into either a monocot or a dicot. So this is the structure of dicotyledons. There are two cotyledons, but here only one cotyledon. And here, if you see the dicots, the leaves will show reticulate venation. So the type of venation in the leaves is reticulate. That is, the leaves will be broad and the type of venation will be like this. But if you take the monocots like grass and all, it shows parallel venation. So the venation will be like this. But here in dicots, they show reticulate venation and also tetramerous or pentamerous flower. That is 4 or 5 members in each floral whorl. For example, if you take the petals, it will have either 4 or 5. So in each floral whorl, so in the next chapter, we'll see about each of the floral whorls and how to represent like. So here we'll just see in brief about the differences between dicot and the monocot. So here they have the 2 cotyledons and the type of venation in leaves is reticulate, and the flowers, they show tetramerous or pentamerous flowers, 4 or 5 members in each floral whorl. This is about dicot. And if you see the monocot, they have only one cotyledon, and the type of venation we saw that it is parallel venation. And here the flowers are trimerous, that is only 3 members. Even if you take a petal or sepal, so it will be only 3. All the floral whorls will be in 3. So they are trimerous flowers. So angiosperms in monocotyledons, they have one cotyledon and parallel venation and trimerous flowers. And also they differ in the type of arrangement in the vascular bundles, how they are arranged in the stem and roots, everything that shows an variation. For example, if you take the type of root, here it is adventitious roots or fibrous roots, particularly in the case of monocot. But in the case of dicots, it is taproot. So even in the type of roots and also the arrangement of the vascular bundles, they show difference between dicot and monocot. So when you see the reproduction, so which is the reproductive structure in the case of angiosperms? So here the main feature here is the flower. So I hope you know the structure of flower, right? So flower is the reproductive structure. So what are the parts? It contains the accessory organs and the essential organs. Accessory and essential. So what are these accessory organs and essential organs? So accessory organs are these like sepals, petals. So sepals will form the calyx and petals which form the corolla. So these are the accessory calyx and corolla. So what are the use of these petals? Because they attract the insects and also birds and even birds for pollination. So they attract the insects and birds. So when you compare the type of pollination in the case of angiosperms, here the pollination is by many agents, even wind and also the insects, animals, water, or acts as a pollinating agent. But in the case of gymnosperms, wind is the main pollinating agent. So the pollen grains are carried by wind and they are transferred to the micropyle end of the ovule. But here there are many pollinating agents because of the presence of flowers. It attracts many insects and birds. So, and what do you mean by this essential organ? That is the androecium and gynoecium. Androecium and gynoecium. So what are these androecium and gynoecium? These are the reproductive structures that are present. So the flower is the reproductive structure and male sex organ in a flower is a stamen. So this is the stamen. So this is the stamen. So the male sex organ in a flower is a stamen. So this is the structure of stamen, and each stamen, it consists of a filament. So this is a filament and this is the anther. Filament and the anther, and the anther, within the anther, pollen mother cells are present. So within the anther, pollen mother cells are present and they divide by mitosis to produce microspores. So where it is happening? It is happening in the anther, this part of in the flower. Here, what is happening? So this is the anther, and here the pollen mother cell divides by meiosis to produce microspores, which matures into pollen grains. So these pollen grains, then they form the male gamete. So this male gametes actually fuses with the egg. So pollen grains, and if you take the female sex organ in the flower, it is a pistil. So gynoecium, also called carpel. So what are the parts of the female reproductive part? This gynoecium consists of the lower swollen part that is called the ovary, and this is the style and stigma. So this ovary contains many ovules. This is also called the megasporangium. So yesterday in gymnosperms also we saw that the integrated, that is integumented, which is covered by an envelope. The integumented megasporangium is nothing but the ovule. So inside the ovary, many ovules are present and style and stigma. So this is the female reproductive part and this is the male reproductive part. So what happens? this pollen grains which are produced in the stamen, it sticks to the stigma of the female reproductive part. So as a result, there occurs a formation of a pollen tube here. So there will be a formation of the pollen tube. And here this ovule. So we'll see in detail about how the egg cell is formed and how the fertilization is happening. So the female sex organ is a pistil. So it consists of swollen ovary at its base and a long slender slide and a stigma. And the ovary contains many ovules. So here this ovule has the megaspore mother cell. So we saw that in the case of male gamete formation, that is pollen mother cell here, they divide to form the microspores. But here what is happening? The megaspore mother cell, it undergoes meiosis to form 4 haploid megaspores. So they form 4 haploid megaspores, and out of these 4 megaspores, 3 of them degenerate. So 3 of them degenerate, and only one it divides to form an embryo sac. So this embryo sac is also called as the multinucleated embryo sac, or we can call it as a polygonum type. Polygonum type of embryo sac. Or we can call it as monosporic eight nucleate embryo sac, because it has 8 nucleus. Monosporic 8 nucleate embryo sac or polygonum type of embryo sac. So what is happening here in the embryo sac? That is, each embryo sac has a 3-celled egg apparatus, 1 egg cell and 2 synergids and 3 antipodal cells and 2 polar nuclei. So we saw that is out of the 4 megaspores that are formed, only 1 megaspore it develops into 1 embryo cell. So they divide mitotically to form an 8 nucleated structure. So first there occurs a formation of 2 nuclei, then 4, and it forms an 8 nucleated structure. So out of this 8 nucleated structure, what is happening? 3 nuclei, that is here, they form a thing called egg apparatus. These 3 nuclei, they form an egg apparatus. One, that is the egg cell, and the other 2 are called the synergids. And then other 3 cells, it form an antipodals. So we are calling it as an antipodal end, and this is the micropylar end. So at the micropylar end, they have the synergids, that is the egg apparatus with 1 egg cell and 2 synergids. And in the center will be a central cell and 2 polar nuclei is present in the center. So what happens is, when the pollen grain actually it attaches to the stigma and it there occurs in formation of pollen tube, then it reaches here the female gametophyte through the micropylar end, and there will be 2 male gametes, and 1 male gamete it fuses with the egg and form a zygote. The other one will fuse with the polar nuclei. So the polar nuclei, that's what is here. The polar nuclei eventually it fuse to produce a secondary nuclei. First they form a secondary nuclei, and then the pollen grains are dispersed from the anthers. From the anther, the pollen grains are dispersed and they are carried by wind. So this is also one of the main difference here in angiosperms. They are carried by wind or other agencies like water, insect or bat, anything can be a pollinating agent. So they are carried by wind or any other agencies to the stigma of the pistil. So this you have to be clear. So how the pollen grain is entering is, in the case of gymnosperms, it is an direct entry near the micropyle end of the ovule. But here what is happening? Here it is attached to the stigma of the pistil. It is a feature in angiosperm. It is called pollination. So pollen grains germinate on the stigma. They germinate on the stigma, and the that results in the formation of pollen tube, which grow through the tissues of the stigma. So it is a process, how the process of fertilization is happening. So formation of pollen tube, and it grow through the stigma and style and reach the ovule. So it is reaching the ovule. So pollen tube, it enter the embryo sac. So how it is entering? Through the micropylar end, and where the two male gametes are discharged. So each pollen grain will have two male gametes, and one male gamete, it fuses with the egg cell to form a zygote. That process is called syngamy. So here antipodal end, and here is the micropylar end. So here there occurs a formation of endosperm. So how the endosperm is formed? That is a one male gamete. We saw it fuses with the egg to form a zygote. Whereas the other male gamete fuses with the diploid secondary nucleus. That is the polar nucleus. In the middle, we saw that there exists a polar nucleus. So the other male gamete, it fuses with the polar nucleus. So already that polar nucleus is 2n. So now this male gamete is fusing with it. So that is n to form a 3n. So the other male gamete fuses with diploid secondary nucleus to produce triploid primary endosperm nucleus. So the structure that is the primary endosperm nucleus. So because of the involvement of two fusions, so here there occurs a two fusions. One is the formation of zygote. This one male gamete fuses with the egg cell to form zygote, and the other male gamete, it fuses with the polar nuclei to form the primary endosperm nucleus. So because of the involvement of two fusions, this event is known as double fertilization. So this is more important because this is a feature only in angiosperms, so not in any other category. So because of the involvement of two fusions, it is called double fertilization. It is an event unique to angiosperms. So this zygote that is formed, that develops into an embryo that may have either one or two cotyledons. Based on that, you can say it is either as a monocotyledon or the dicotyledon. So what happens to this PEN? That is primary endosperm nucleus. It develops into a structure that is called the endosperm. So what is the role of this endosperm? It provides nourishment to the developing embryo. This zygote will develop into an embryo. So that the process is syngamy, that is the formation of zygote, develops into an embryo. So this PEN, it develops into an endosperm, which provide nourishment to this developing embryo. And what happened to that synergic and the antipodals? So they degenerate after the fertilization is over. These cells, they degenerate, and during these events, the ovules develop into seeds and ovaries develop into a fruit. And the seeds are enclosed with the fruits. So seeds which are developed around is the fruit. So this is the seeds and the fruit. So ovaries develop into a fruit. So this is the main process of reproduction that happen in angiosperms. So you're able to follow, right? So this is the structure that is formed actually. So this is the primary endosperm nucleus, which is triploid, also called PEN. And this antipodal cells, here 3 cells will be present in the antipodal end, and they will degenerate after fertilization, And here there occurs a formation of zygote with the egg cell. That is the male gamete with the egg cell. Here they forms a zygote. And what happens to the synergids? They will also degenerate after fertilization. So this is the structure after fertilization. So the first we saw, and these are the cells that are present before fertilization. That is the development of female gametophyte. Initially antipodal cells and two polar nuclei, then egg and synergids will be present. This is before fertilization, and after fertilization, the synergids and the antipodal cell will degenerate and there occurs a formation of zygote and the PEN or the primary endosperm nucleus. So I hope you are clear with this process, right? Any doubts in this regarding the fertilization of angiosperms? So clear, you just note down the difference, like in what ways they differ from gymnosperms. Okay. So next, we'll see about the alternation of generation. So what do you mean by alternation of generation? So this even with all the, even when we are learning about the bryophytes, pteridophytes also, we also saw about this alternation of generation. So here we'll see how it differs from plant to plant, like how the alternation of generation exists in bryophytes, pteridophytes, and then gymnosperms and angiosperms. So here, if you take any plant, there will be the presence of both haploid and diploid cells will be present. So they form the haploid and diploid plant bodies. I am sure you are now familiar with what is an haploid and a diploid. It is N, and this condition is called the 2N, diploid. So haploid plant body, it is also called the gametophytic phase or gametophyte. It produces gametes. So that leads to the formation of gametes by mitosis. So after fertilization, the zygote also divides by mitosis to produce the diploid plant body or a sporophyte. So there occurs a formation of a sporophytic plant body. And this produces, this sporophytic plant body, it produces haploid spores by meiosis. So after meiosis, actually, so this is meiosis, it results in the formation of, as a result of meiosis, there occurs a formation of haploid spores. Then spores divide by mitosis to form a haploid plant bodies. These spores develop to form a plant body. Thus, if you take any life cycle of a sexually reproducing plant, there occurs both the phases. It is a gametophytic phase and a sporophytic phase. So it depends whether the plant is a gametophyte or a sporophyte. It depends on which phase is dominant. That is, in majority of the life cycle, whether the gametophytic phase is dominant or the sporophytic phase is dominant. So we'll see about in detail. So there are three patterns of plant life cycle. One is the haplontic, and another one is the diplontic, and another is the haplodiplontic. So what are the differences between these three? So for example, if you take the, so this actually shows the process of the fertilization in angiosperms. I hope you're clear with this diagram. For example, this is the anther, and they form the microspores. That is the pollen grain, form the pollen grain, and this pollen grain attaches just to the stigma, which is the female reproductive part, and then it forms the pollen tube. After it attaches, the pollen grain attaches to the stigma, there occurs a formation of pollen tube. So that's the pollen tube, and here this is the female reproductive part. So this part is the female reproductive. This is the ovary and with many ovules. So here ovary, then it contains the megaspore mother cells, Then here, what is this? Development of embryo sac with the egg and egg nucleus and the zygote. Yeah, there is a formation of zygote and the endosperm. So endosperm, how endosperm is formed? So this is a triploid state. This alone is the triploid in the case of angiosperms. So here it is formed by the fusion of polar nuclei and the male gamete to form an endosperm, and this supplies food to the growing embryo. So this zygote develop into an embryo, and the food supply is with the help of this endosperm. We provide nourishment to the growing embryo, and then grows into a seed. Then again, the mature plant or the sporophytic plant body, and that again produces the anther and also here the female reproductive part of the pistil. So this shows the life cycle of an angiosperm. So, and if you see the haplontic, diplontic, and haplodiplontic life cycle, for example, this is the life cycle of, that is haplontic life cycle. So why it is called haplontic life cycle? The term itself, we can say here the haploid phase is dominant here. For example, if you see the structure, the pink area here, this is the, so see from here, so this is the zygote, and then for meiosis there occurs in formation of spores. So these are the spores that are formed. Then it form a gametophyte. So this is in haploid stage, and here this is also haploid, and by gametogenesis it forms, that is syngamy fusion occurs to form a zygote. Here if you see this, most of the life cycle, it exists in the gametophytic form. It is only the haploid form exists in most of the phase. Only the zygote is the only thing which is diploid here. So we are calling it as a haplontic life cycle. So in what type of species this haplontic cycle is happening? That is, it is happening in lower organisms such as algae, specific type of algae, the two volvox, Spirogyra, and some species. So we have to be clear with it. They may ask, for example, haplontic life cycle occurs in volvox, Spirogyra, Chlamydomonas, and some other options like mosses, liverwort, like that. So we have to be clear in which species this type of life cycle is happening. So it's not generally like algae. There are also some exceptions that some algae shows the other form of life cycle also, like diplontic and haplodiplontic. So particularly volvox, Spirogyra, and some species of Chlamydomonas and many varieties of algae, they show haplontic life cycle. So here the sporophytic generation is represented only by the zygote. So here if you see the life cycle of haplontic plant, any variety if you take, here zygote is the only thing which shows the diploid condition. All the other gametes and most of the phase, they show only the haploid cells. So this zygote undergoes meiosis to form haploid spores, and they divide mitotically to form a gametophyte. So the spore will develop to form a gametophyte, and the dominant photosynthetic phase is the free living gametophyte. So this is one of the main factors. So this gametophytic phase is able to undergo photosynthesis, and they are independent, so free living gametophyte. Example is in the case of algae. So the algae, volvox, Spirogyra, and some species of Chlamydomonas are examples for haplontic life cycle. Okay, clear? And if you see the diplontic life cycle, so you see here, this blue color, it represents the diplontic or the 2N phase, diploid. So here, the diploid sporophyte is the dominant photosynthetic independent phase. So if you take gymnosperms and angiosperms, here the sporophyte is the independent phase, that what we are seeing, the plant body is a sporophyte. So they can undergo photosynthesis, they can prepare their own food and also absorption everything they can do independently. So the sporophytic phase is the dominant photosynthetic and independent phase. So here the gametophytic phase is represented by a single to few cell haploid gametophyte. So here the only when they form gametes alone, they will show the haploid condition. The remaining rest of the life cycle fully, they will show only the diploid condition. So what the plant body that we are seeing is a sporophyte. It is an independent phase. So here the examples are an algae fucus. So generally not all algae are haplontic. Some algae like the fucus species that comes under diplontic life cycle. So we have to be specific that what species come under haplontic and what species come under diplontic and what species come under haplodiplontic. Clear, right? So algae, that is fucus, and all seed-bearing plants, gymnosperms and angiosperms, they are all examples for the diplontic life cycle. So here, what about the gametophytic phase in this? We saw that there is very limited, that is only this spores here, after meiosis they form spores, that is the only gametophytic phase. So it is few to multi-celled. So it is not of much visible. Only that spore formation alone is the gametophytic phase here. In the case of diplontic life cycle, so it occurs in all seed-bearing plants and also in some algae like fucus. Then next comes the haplodiplontic. So here if you see, there occurs an equal haploid as well as the diploid phase. So it varies from species to species. So it depends on which is dominant. In some species, the haploid phase will be dominant. In some species, the diploid phase will be dominant. So based on that, we'll say haplodiplontic, like which is the dominant phase. So it is intermediate condition between haplontic and diplontic. So how it is intermediate? For example, here both gametophyte and sporophyte are multicellular. So both are multicellular and often free living, but they have the different dominant phases. So in the case of bryophytes, if you take, so which phase will be dominant? In the case of bryophytes, we already saw the life cycle of bryophytes. So in the bryophytes, the gametophytic phase will be dominant. So for example, in the case of bryophytes, the dominant phase is dominant phase in the sense it should be able to undergo photosynthesis, carry out the photosynthesis on its own. It is independent photosynthetic thalloid or the erect phase. It should have either thalloid or the erect phase. So it is a haploid gametophyte and it alternates with the short-lived multicellular sporophyte. And it is totally or partially dependent on gametophyte. So the gametophytic phases, we already saw the life cycle. So I hope you are clear with that. That is, the gametophytic body is independent photosynthetic thalloid or erect, and it is a haploid gametophyte, but it has a short-lived multicellular sporophyte, and this sporophyte is totally or partially dependent on the gametophyte for its, so they are dependent on gametophyte. Gametophyte for either the nutrition, the absorption of nutrients, it is dependent on the gametophyte. So which phase is dominant? So sporophyte is dependent on gametophyte. So here the gametophyte is dominant. So dominant gametophytic phase. In the case of bryophytes. But if you take pteridophytes, they have the diploid sporophyte, which is dominant, independent, photosynthetic, vascular plant. And this alternates with the gametophyte, short-lived haploid gametophyte. So I hope you are clear with this, right? So which phase is dominant? In the case of both the bryophytes and the pteridophytes, it comes under the example of haplodiplontic life cycle. So it depends on which phase is dominant. If you see the bryophytes, the dominant phase is the gametophytic phase. That is, the gametophytic plant body is able to exist independently. That is, they can photosynthesize on its own, and for everything it is independent. But the sporophytic plant body is short-lived and it is dependent on gametophyte, either partially or totally. But if you take the pteridophyte, the diploid sporophyte body is dominant, independent, and photosynthetic body, but there exists a short-lived haploid gametophyte. So if you take algae, most of the algae are haplontic, but some of the algae like Ectocarpus, then Polysiphonia, kelps, they are all haplodiplontic. And fucus, we saw that an alga fucus, which shows the diplontic life cycle. So generally the algae comes under the haplontic life cycle, but there are exceptions. Ectocarpus, Polysiphonia, and helps or haplodiplontic, and fucus, it shows diplontic life cycle. So I hope you're clear with this diagrams, right, for these three life cycles, that is haplodiplontic. So here both the phases exist, that is both the haploid as well as the diploid. So depending on the type of plant, whichever is dominant, you can say either it is a haplodiplontic, the dominant phase is a haploid or a diploid. So this is the alternation of generation. So there occurs an alternating haploid and the diploid phase. So with this, we have completed the plant kingdom. So I hope you are clear with it. So what are the differences that we saw? Today we saw the differences between gymnosperms and angiosperms. So if you see the pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, and also how they vary from the thallophyta and bryophytes. So you be clear with all the differences. For example, if you take the algae with the other higher plants, means they are mostly aquatic and the body is not differentiated. And if you take the bryophytes, the main features there are the presence of false root, stem, and leaves. So that is one thing that is in bryophytes. And then if you come to pteridophytes, there the main difference is the presence of vascular tissues, but algae and bryophytes, they won't have vascular tissues. So vascular tissues is the development there. And then in the next stage in gymnosperms, presence of seeds. So, and then in angiosperms, the presence of flowers and fruits. So you just note down the main points, how the vascular tissues are in each type of the plant, and where it exists, and what about the plant bodies, like root, stem, and leaves. So these are the main differences actually. So better you write it as a tabular column so that it will be easy for you to answer any type of questions regarding these. Okay, and then we also about the alternation of generation, haploid, diploid, and haplodiplontic life cycle. So we'll see few questions. So any doubts in this? We'll see questions first. So in angiosperms, functional megaspore develop into embryo sac, ovule, endosperm, and pollen sac. So what the functional megaspores? Yeah, A. Yeah, good. A is correct answer. So functional megaspore, it develops into embryo sac, and we saw the structure of embryo sac, right? So it's an 8 nucleated embryo sac. So that is the correct answer, option E. And second question, multicellular sex organs, formation of embryo, dominant gametophytic phase, requirement of water during sexual reproduction, absence of true root, stem, and leaves are some important characters of bryophytes, pteridophytes, angiosperms, and gymnosperms. Yeah, option A. Good, Nandini. Iman. So you're clear, right? So no need to explain because we saw all these sex organs and embryo development. So these are all the features of bryophytes. Gametophytic phase is dominant and they require the water during sexual reproduction. That is for the transfer of the male gamete, that is anthrozoids. They have to swim to reach the archegonia. That process is called zoidogamy. So zoidogamy happens in Thallophyta, Bryophyta, and Pteridophyta. Okay. So the answer A is the correct option. The next question. Match the following. Haplontic life cycle, diplontic life cycle, haplodiplontic life cycle. So you first match with all this A and then with the column 2. Let us match with column 1 and column 2. Then finally we give the correct option. Yes, option E. So you are clear, right? No need to explain. So haplontic happens in algae and diplontic seed bearing and haplodiplontic this bryophytes, pteridophytes. So A3, then B2, then C1. So the option A is the correct. So which of the following is the unique feature of angiosperms? Haploid endosperm, circinate vernation, coraloid roots, and double fertilization. So which of the following is the unique feature? Yeah, option D, good. Double fertilization. So if you take haploid endosperm is the, so this may some questions may come like this. For example, they may give the haploid endosperm and triploid endosperm. So what is the difference? Differences like the haploid endosperm is present in gymnosperms, but triploid endosperm is formed in angiosperms. So you just note down all these differences. So some questions, so it is an important question they may ask. So haploid, why the haploid endosperm is formed in gymnosperms? Because in the case of gymnosperms, the endosperm is formed before fertilization. But in the case of angiosperm, the endosperm is formed after fertilization. So that is triploid. So this is one of the main difference. And the unique feature of angiosperm is double fertilization because two fusions are happening. One male gamete fuses with the egg to form zygote and the other male gamete fuses with the polar nuclei to form an PEN or a triploid nucleus is forming endosperm. primary endosperm nucleus is formed. Okay, is it clear? Life cycle of ectocarpus and fucus respectively. So I hope you remember this, that we saw that there are some exceptions. Ectocarpus and fucus. So what will be the answer? Yeah, option B. Good. In ectocarpus it is haplodiplontic and in fucus it is diplontic. So option B is the correct. Double fertilization is exhibited. Yeah, this is almost the same question in a different form. So double fertilization is exhibited by, yeah, C. Good. Is exhibited by angiosperms. The common ancestor of cycads and dicotyledons, whether it is seed ferns, lycopods, xylophyton, and conifers. So what is the common ancestor? From where they evolved? Cycads comes under gymnosperms. So which is the common ancestor for cycads and dicotyledons? So what will be the answer for this? So the answer is seed ferns. A is the correct option, because we saw that in the case of pteridophytes, the zygote will form the young embryo, and this is taking place within the female gametophyte. And this is the precursor for the formation of seed coat. Yeah, option A, correct. So you're clear with that, right? So zygote develops into an embryo and it forms a female gametophyte. And this is the precursor for the formation or the seed development. So from this, next stage is the development of seed in the case of gymnosperms and then angiosperms. Evolution of seed. Like. So you are clear with this till now? And maybe we'll see a few more questions related to this chapter. Okay. So if you take the gymnosperms, for example, all gymnosperms are option 1, it is heterosporous, arborescent, seed plants, all the above. So which will be the correct option? All gymnosperms are heterosporous, arborescent, seed plants, and all the above. Gymnosperms. So you're able to follow? Gymnosperms or heterosporous. One option is heterosporous, arborescent, and seed plant. All the above. So it will be the correct option. All gymnosperms are, now are you able to follow? All gymnosperms are heterosporous, arborescent, seed plants, and fourth option is all the above. So here the answer is all the above. Actually, all are properties of gymnosperms. They are heterosporous, that is, they can produce two types of spores, and arborescent, they are woody plants. Arborescent means woody plants. So gymnosperms are woody plants, and they are also seed plants. So D is the correct option. All the above will be the correct option. Okay. So this is the correct answer. Is it clear? So I'll go to the next question. The gymnosperm plants lack vessels, fruits, companion cells, all the above. gymnosperms lack? So here also the answer will be all the above. That is, they lack vessels. Though they have the vascular tissues, there are no vessels in xylem. And also they lack fruits. There occurs no fruits. Only seeds are present in gymnosperm, no fruits. And also they lack companion cells. Though phloem is present, the companion cells are absent in the case of gymnosperms. So all the above is the correct answer. So are you able to follow these questions? You want me to repeat? Okay. The gymnosperm plants lack option 1 vessels, option 2 fruits, option 3 companion cells, option 4 all the above. Okay, so the correct option is all the above because gymnosperm plants lack vessels, fruits, and companion cells. So then the next question is, gymnosperm plants do not produce fruits because they do not have, the first option is ovary, second is gametes, third fertilization, and four, none of these. Gymnosperm plants do not produce fruits. Why they do not produce fruits? Because they do not have ovary. So are you clear? Gymnosperms, they do not produce, yeah, ovary is the correct option. No ovary, so they do not produce fruits. Then the next question is, cones in gymnosperm plants are, for option 1, bisexual, 2, unisexual, sterile, any of the above. Cones in gymnosperm plants are either bisexual, unisexual, sterile, any of the above. Yeah, unisexual is the correct answer. Because the cones, maybe we saw that either male cones or the female cones. So it is a unisexual. Then in which of the following characters the angiosperms resemble gymnosperms? That is, angiosperms and gymnosperms are similar. First one is presence of ovule, absence of endosperm, presence of vessel, and mode of fertilization by zoidosyphonogamy. So in what ways they resemble? First option, presence of ovule, absence of endosperm, and the presence of vessels and mode of fertilization by zoidosyphonogamy. So are you able to follow? So here the correct option is the presence of ovule. So the ovules are present in both angiosperms and gymnosperm. In which of the following characters? That is, they gave 4 characters. So in which of the following characters the angiosperm resemble gymnosperms? Presence of ovule, absence of endosperm, presence of vessels, and mode of fertilization by zoidosyphonogamy. So if you take zoidosyphonogamy, it occurs only in gymnosperms and not in angiosperms. And if you take the presence of vessels, also vessels are present in angiosperms, but they are not present in gymnosperms. So presence of vessels and absence of endosperm. So these are all the ways in which they are different. But the presence of ovule is common in gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay. And then the next question. The gametophyte embedded in sporophyte in Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, Cryptogams, and Spermatophyta. The gametophyte are embedded in sporophyte. So in which of the following plants? Gametophyte is embedded in the sporophyte. Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, Cryptogams, and Spermatophyta. So what will be the option for this? Are you able to follow this question? Yeah, option D is the correct answer. Okay, good. So the gametophyte is embedded in sporophyte in spermatophytes. So spermatophytes are nothing but gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay, so is it clear? And any doubts in this plant kingdom generally? You have any doubts in plant kingdom? Yeah. So we saw about the plants algae, then bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. So clear, right? So now we can differentiate between these plants based on the different characteristics. So, and you can answer any type of question. So you make it as a table and writing the characteristic features under each category so that it will be easy to study and also be clear the examples that comes under different categories also, so that you can answer any type of questions. Okay. Okay, then tomorrow we'll start the new chapter. We'll meet tomorrow then. Okay, thank you.